Welcome to TestTube, a place where we can share our knowledge through short videos. Even you can contribute to us by making a small video of any problem that you face in your life and how you have solved it. The video can be as short and as simple as possible, and you upload it in your Google Drive and share that link to us through that email that is shown over in this video. This way we can build a rich library having solution to any problem that anybody could possibly face in their life, and they can find a solution over here in this comment space. And by the way, the video will be uploaded with your name on it so that you can have all the credit for this. Thank you. Welcome to REST API automation using Katalon Studio course. Before we start how to automate REST APIs using Katalon Studio, first let us try to understand the REST world, which means let us try to understand the concepts that are involved in understanding the RESTful web services or REST APIs, or what is called REST. These concepts are going to be helpful everywhere, not just that you are learning a Katalon Studio or a REST assured or a karate framework in order to automate a RESTful web services. So this is going to be generic, and this is the most important thing that anybody would expect you to know when you say that you are working on RESTful services automation or RESTful services manual testing. So now let us move on. Before we start discussing about the concept, first of all, I'm going to explain you what working software which is built with RESTful web services normally consists of. So here we go. Any software is built on will have these three possible layers. The one is GUI layer, which is something which user can work on, which user used to interact with the application through. And the second layer is a business layer where the APIs are actually designed and implemented. So the first layer can be also known as the client, and second layer is also known as server in REST old. And the third layer is going to be our data layer. And this data layer is where the information which is used by server and client are stored upon. So in other words, the server and the data layer are embedded together so that combinedly they can be called as server. So now we understand that we have this model which is client and server, which is helpful in communications in order to work on certain data to make look like a software is working. And if we need another third party application who wanted to have similar implementation that the client one is having. In other words, if client 2 is also looking for the same set of information which client 1 is using, but for their own purpose. So if this is going to be your case, then what is going to happen is, instead of building the software again for client 2, what is possible in REST world is that we just expose what is built for client 1 to client 1 as well, client 2 as well, and this is happening through RESTful services. So instead of building the entire software again for client 2, which is having similar requirement for client 1, what we are going to do is we are just exposing the APIs which are designed for client 1 to client 2 as well. So that's the main advantage of using the RESTful web services while designing a software application. So now you understand the real-time implementation of RESTful web services and the advantages of using the RESTful web services. All right, now let us try to get familiar more with the REST old. So when you are working on a RESTful services, people will expect you to know these vocabulary. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it look like simple. So you see a lot of words over here which we have to use as part of our regular learnings and the design of the RESTful web services. So if you know these terms and if you also know what these terms meant, then it means you know how to work on RESTful web services. All right. And what I'm going to do now is you can't by heart obviously all these words. So if you have to remember these words, you have to understand its implementation and its true meaning. Now I'm going to help you by explaining these words in such a way that you can remember them easily, and you are going to remember them easily because you are going to understand the true concepts behind these words, and I'm going to teach you how you can connect each word with the other word, so you will never forget what this is. Okay, so now in this entire list of the words, I can pick up any word and I can start linking the word with any of the rest of the word. So which means all these words are interrelated. So you can start learning from any of these words and you can extend the discussion to any other word in this entire list. So, but I'm going to pick up that word, you know, which can be the true start point of our discussion and our journey into the REST API world. And that word which I'm going to pick up is REST. All right. So in many of the interviews, probably you would have done automation using REST assured tool or a karate tool or HTTP Apache libraries or any other framework, whichever you have implemented. But still, when you face this question, what is REST and what is RESTful services? By the interviewee, most of the people fails to answer the question. And now, after this session, it will be a piece of cake for you to remember what is REST and what is RESTful and what are all the other words and the true concepts behind these words. So, let us say when an interviewer have asked you what is REST. So most of the people will explain REST as representational state transfer, but they really don't know what does it mean. And now we are going to cover what it actually means, and we are going to cover it in a simple way so that you will never forget about it. All right, so now I'm going to start with the same definition that everybody gives. What is REST? REST is an acronym for representational state transfer. But okay, that's fine. But what is REST? Still, the question remains same because you can't explain what is REST just by explaining the acronym. So what is REST is? REST is an architectural style. Okay, again, what does it mean? Nobody will understand, right? If you say REST is an architectural style and REST means representational state transfer. Nobody gets it, what it is, correct? So let me explain it again. So I'm going to say the same terms again, but don't be irritated. I'm going to say it in a different way. So again, REST means you are correct. It is a representational state transfer and it is also an architectural style. And why I'm saying this is because it's not going to be a protocol like HTTP, and also it's not an API which is like SOAP API. So REST is neither a protocol nor a SOAP API, but it is an architectural style and it is representational state transformer. So now we know what it is not. Now what it is. So it's not a protocol, um, it's not an API. So it's a concept. So REST is going to be a concept. REST is a concept or a standard set of terms which are meant to follow certain guidelines. So we have some principles under REST. So all these principles are forming an architecture, and that is what a REST architecture is about. And any web service that is constrained to these rules or principles which are designed under REST, if that web service is following this, then it is simply called as RESTful web service or RESTful API. Right, now you got it right. So REST is nothing but a set of constraints that are designed in a form as a standard, which can be implemented to design RESTful services. So now you understand. So REST is different, RESTful service is different, and HTTP is different. So it's clear, I believe, right? So now let's try to understand more. When we say REST is a set of architectural constraints that are intended to be followed. So what are those principles that makes a web service as RESTful service, and that makes a service is following the REST architecture? So these are the 6 guidelines that a web service to be followed when we say it as RESTful web service. That is client server, stateless, cacheable, uniform interface, layer system, and code on demand. So if a web service is designed in such a way that following all these 3 constraints, then we call it as RESTful web service, which is following the REST architecture. So now you got it. So what actually is REST and what actually is a RESTful API. Now let us try to understand what are these 6 guiding principles. And this is very easy to remember when I explain what are these. Just by the word you will remember what it is. And surprisingly, we have already discussed what is code on demand and what is layered system in our previous example, wherein I'm explaining what is a working software. So there we spoke about the layer structure. So the working software has followed the layer structure, and the working software also has followed code on demand, which means the RESTful web services which are designed for client 1 are reusable for client 2 by not building them again, instead just by exporting the code which is designed for client 1, which means it is satisfying the principle of code on demand. So our previous example has obeyed the layer system principle and code on demand principle, and unknowingly, not unknowingly, and same application is also following the other 4 rules of REST, which is stateless, cacheable, uniform interface, and client and server. Okay, and by the way, I have already explained that it is also following the client server rule. So it has already followed 3 rules. Now we are going to discuss the other 3 rules which makes it as a RESTful application. Alright, so what is stateless, cacheable, and uniform interface? So before we discuss it, I'll just try to explain once again. Okay, let's leave it. Let me not explain it because you already understood client server, layer system, code on demand with an example. So it is clear by now for you. Now, let me try to explain what is stateless. So, stateless is a client server communication. See, again, in order to explain stateless, I had to explain client server word. So now you got it by now. So all these words are related. So you can't explain any word independently without explaining the other word or without linking to the other word. So statelessness is client server communication, meaning no client information is stored between the requests. So we already spoke when in client server model, the interaction goes through requests, which are RESTful web services. But these RESTful web services are not going to store any information which is not intended to be stored, but it will still store certain level of information which is it is going to use under the guideline of cacheable. All right, okay, fine. So that is what statelessness means. So it has no state in the communication. So that's what stateless means. So this principle is also followed in our earliest software application. So now we have covered the four principles which is followed by an application said to be built on RESTful web services. Now let us try to understand what is cacheable. So cacheable is uh, a data. So now we understand the word cache means it's a random access memory that a CPU uses in order for faster communication. So it's the same concept. So when a web service has to retrieve some data from the server, so it will not necessarily have to interact with the server all the time. For example, if you made a request to get the user details and you have made the request for the first time, so in that case what happens is it asks the client for that information and it will pass it to the client. But the next time and the next time and the third time and the fourth time, if you are requesting for the same information through the same API, what it will do instead of communicating with the server is it stores the information in a cache memory, so it can respond immediately without dealing with the server. So that makes the communication faster, and that's the concept of cacheable. So when a RESTful service follows this, sticks to this principle, then it is a RESTful service. Now, moving on to uniform interface. So we are talking about the uniform communication, right? So when we talk about uniformity, again, we have four more guidelines under uniform interface. We say an interface is an uniform interface when it is following these four guidelines of the behavior. So if the component behavior is following these four guidelines, then we call it as an uniform interface. These guidelines are identification of resources, which means resource requested are identifiable and separate from the representation sent to the client. So what does it mean? So it means each resource use unique and it is identifiable and it is separate from the other request that is made to the resource. So that's what it is. It should be identifiable. Manipulation of resources through representation. So you can manipulate the information by some simple controls. So that's a principle of uniform interface. And the message is self-destructive. So the message should be self-destructive after certain amount of time. And the message should be in hypermedia state or hypertext state, which means that after accessing a resource, the client should be able to use hyperlinks to find all the other available information and take action against it. Alright, so if these four guidelines are followed, then we call that interface is an uniform interface, and that is a RESTful web service. So now we understand if a web service, any web service, if it is just following these six guidelines which are defined under REST architecture, then we call that service as RESTful web service. And in our discussions, when we are talking about uniform interface, you are hearing this word a lot, which is resource. So now let's try to understand what are resources. All right. So what is a resource? So resource is nothing but an information. So it's an information that is present, that is used by the server and also by the client in their interactions. So a resource can be a document, it can be an image, it can be a temporal service, or a collection of other resources. So in short, resource is nothing but an information. All right. So now we understand resource. So in our test world, we call it as data, right? So we understand resource. Now what are the resource methods or webs? So resource methods are the mode of communication in order to obtain or access that particular resource. And this is also referred as verbs. And these are normally the get, post, put, or delete methods. So which are the actions that are applicable on resources. All right, fine. Now these communications happens on uniform resource identifiers. Like we said in the concepts of user interface, uniform interface, we say that identification of resource as one of the guidelines. And we are talking about the identification should be different for each resource. And this leads to this uniform resource identifiers. So with the help of URIs, you can make a resource identifiable unique way, which is only for that particular resource. So this can be URL when you are extending it to your web world. All right. So now what are CRUD operations? So CRUD operations are nothing but create, read, update, and delete operations. So these are operations, and also these are resource methods in order to handle the data. So when get, put, post, delete methods are performing some operations on resources, those operations can be referred to CRUD operations. All right. So now we have covered the orange words and the blue words, right? And now let's talk about the navy blue words. And when we are talking that REST means representative state transfer, what does it mean? The word representation. So representation means how you are representing the resource or information, right? So how you are doing it. We know that we are using a HTTP protocol. That's fine. So this protocol is used in communication, but how that resource is following a certain standards or representation of that particular resource. So that representation is something called representation media type, and this could be anything. It can be JSON, it can be XML, it can be text, and it can be HTML. So there are many forms to the representation. So that is what representation media type. And now what is payload and body, and what is endpoint? So endpoint is nothing but a point where the resource is placed on, or it could be a server endpoint, or it can be anything which is giving access to the resources. And now what is payload or body? So body is a term which is something which can be referred in the request, and also it can be referred in the response that we get from a server. All right. Payload is something which we send as a load to the endpoint, which is understood by the client, sorry, by the server, and return some response to the client. So, right, now we understand these words. Now let us try to understand the remaining words which are mostly used in manual testing and also in automation. So request and response. So request is something which is triggered by a client, which will help in understanding what is the information that it is the client is looking for. And response is something which is returned for a request made to a server. And response is written by the server and received by the client. And now the parameterization. So parameterization is a concept that we are going to use in automation. So it's like when we say that we are parameterizing a request, it means that we are giving some energy to the request so that the request can be used multiple times by varying or changing different types of data types. So in that way, you can build many request types just by altering some variables. And orchestration. So orchestration means like integrating the APIs in order to build the application end-to-end functionality. Schematic validations. Schematic validations are the validations that are involved in the API form. So we can validate what is the form of API, which is it a JSON format or is it an XML formatted, and we can call the data types that are used in this representation. So these are all come under schematic validations. So okay, that's a lot to remember, and also that is how you can remember easily when you understand these concepts. But don't worry about remembering this entire video or audio. You can refer to the video again and again so that you will understand these concepts easily. Or else, what you can also do is you can go to this blog forverstyles.blogspot.com. Here I have explained all the details which I have just explained now. So if you are a person who likes to read the content, you can go to this website and you can understand the concept. And also, I'm going to upload all these YouTube videos on tutorials in the same blog. So don't worry that there is a lot of way to follow these videos. You can refer to my blog or you can refer to my YouTube channel for these sessions. All right. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos and please like if you like these videos so that I will be more excited to make my next videos with the real concepts and you can remember them easily. Thank you. If you have any videos like this, please upload them in your Google Drive and share that link to us in that email given over here so that we can upload it for you with your name on it. And that way we can build a common repository where anybody can find solution to the problems which they are facing. Thanks for your support and please subscribe to this channel if you wanted to see more videos like this. Bye.